Well, folks, you know you're in for a treat when you hear that tune because it's time for another week of the RecPoker podcast. I'm your host, Jim Reid, Bluffsterini in the home game and at RecPoker Jim on Twitter. And I have the best freaking job in the world, talking poker with my friends here on the Strategy Forums edition of the podcast every Monday night while we steal each other's chips in the nightly home game. Now, I have to mention we're brought to you by Running Aces. They are the official sponsor of the RecPoker podcast, and they're located less than an hour north of the Twin Cities in the beautiful state of Minnesota. You can find out more about them by going to runaces.com. Most of what we do here is free. We're a largely volunteer-based organization, so we do depend on the support of our sponsors and our premium members who pay $15 a month to take part in all our training materials and study opportunities. And we really appreciate their support. So if you want to try your first month at RecPoker Premium, it only takes $5 if you use the code RecPoker at checkout. But even after that, it's only $15 a month. So we all feel like it's a real bargain. And if that's not for you, if you want to just take advantage of all our free resources and all the great ways that you can improve as a player with your free community account at RecPoker, all you have to do is sign up. It takes an email address and a smile, and we insist on both. So come join us for free at RecPoker and take your poker game to the next level and have a freaking great time doing it with me and the rest of the RECing Crew here. So you get used to hearing my voice on Mondays because they let me host the show, but I'm really just a small wheel, a small cog in the machine that is RecPoker. I'm one of the folks on what we like to call the RECing Crew. So if you want to find out about me or the rest of the members of the RECing Crew, our leadership panel here, you can go to rec.poker/crew, but you can also just listen up because you're going to meet a few of them right here tonight on the air. And because we do this alphabetically by first name, that's going to start us off with Keith Brandt. You might know him as MonkieSystem. Keith, take it away.
Hi, I'm Keith Brandt. That's MonkieSystem online, just about everywhere. And I run the Monkeys Off Table Tools every month at RecPoker.
I'm Kim Kilroy. I'm PetVat33 on the social platforms. I'm Fergie56 in the home game. And I do a hand history review just like we're going to do tonight, once a month.
And I'm Rob Washam, and I'm Rabman50 just about everywhere. And you can join me and a bunch of our premium members on the first and third Wednesdays of each month as we go through the book study.
That's right. So it's not just the forums, it's not just the home games, the Discord, the road trips, the podcast. We've got a very rich and full premium membership. And you're just kind of getting a taste of what we do there every week. But we are here for the forums edition of the podcast, where we take a strategy question from our forums and talk about it here on the air every week. We're going to take a look at a spot today fielded by our very own Keith Brandt. So, Keith, this is a spot you were playing in a $400 World Series of Poker circuit event. And you've been playing a little more since you recently retired. Congratulations, sir. Turning into a regular traveling grinder. So tell us a little bit about this hand and sort of take us through the action. I think we'll find a very interesting set of rabbit holes to fall down.
Okay, like Jim just said, this is a $400 WSOP circuit event in the Midwest. And in this spot, the blinds are at 400, 800, with an 800 big blind ante. I have about 70K in the hijack and open the action with for 1800 with pocket nines. And only the big blind with 55K calls. So the effective stack is about, let's say, 70. The big blind
70, 70 big blinds.
70 big blinds. Yep. Yeah. Sorry
perfect,
about that.
Perfect. No, that's all good.
Yep. The big blind is a loose, aggressive, competent player. That's the read that I had at this point. Been playing for a couple hours already. I've had a fairly aggressive image myself, and I've built a well above average stack. So we go to the flop. It's 4,800 chips. And the flop comes out Queen of Hearts, Jack of Diamonds, Five of Clubs. And remember, we got pocket nines. And the big blind checked. And then I bet 3,000. And the big blind calls.
That's 3,000 into 4,800.
Yes.
So let's just start here. So I think the opening the pocket nines is uncontroversial. Obviously, we're going to do that, particularly from the hijack. And when the flop comes Queen, Jack, 5, and we get checked to, I'll turn to the panel here for their thoughts. But for me, this feels like a high frequency bet with a lot of the hands that we might have here. Kim, you unmuted first.
Yeah, I know. Yep. High frequency bet, but a small size. So that's the only part that I would disagree with. For Keith, like, I think your size was too big for a high frequency bet for this type of board with 2 Broadway cards. It's just smacks our range. And we have all of the sets. We have this, way bigger range advantage here than the big blind. And so when we're going to bet most of our range, we can just bet small.
All right. So the big blind does call. So we go to the turn with 10,800, and the turn is the 6 of clubs. So it's Queen of Hearts, Jack of Diamonds, 5 of clubs, 6 of clubs. And Keith, you're saying they check again here.
Yes. Yep. But then the action went check. I checked back the other turn this time.
Rob, you unmuted. Did you have something to add there?
Yeah, I think in that when we talked about the flop, I think a flop like Ace Queen 5, you might find us betting bigger sizing. We bet frequently with a bigger sizing. But the Queen Jack, since it doesn't have a king or an ace, it kind of really hits that sweet spot of the big blind calling range. So that's where I think where Kim was coming from, that you bet a little smaller there. That's generally what I'm thinking that you would find if you put it in a solver. They'd probably have you betting a more frequent amount of the time. As far as the action on the turn, when it goes bet call pre-flop or on the flop, what kind of hands are you putting him on when he just calls?
Yeah, I'm putting him on a pair.
Putting him on a pair of queens or jacks?
Yep. Or maybe a pocket pair that's lower.
What about
tens or eights?
Yeah. Or he could be on King 10. He could be on, I don't think he's on Ace King. He would have 3-bet that pre. He could be on
10-9 maybe.
10-9, but I've got that blocked.
True, with pocket nines. Great point.
Yeah.
So King 10 is probably the most viable
like draw hand, because there's no
draw hand, because there's no flush draw on this board.
Well, do you think he'd call it with Ace 5 with a backdoor flush draw?
Oh yeah, that's a good one.
Yeah.
That's a good one. Yeah.
Ace 5 of diamonds, Ace 5 of hearts. Yep. Okay, I'm just wondering, because I'm thinking that and this, correct me if I'm wrong, but a lot of times I get into these spots where on the turn I choose to check with a hand that is obviously not top pair, top kicker type hand, but I still have something. So then I have to kind of try to understand, what is this person calling me with that I'm ahead of, or a hand that I can get him to fold by betting again.
Mm-hmm.
So in other words, if I bet on the turn, I'm going to try to see if I can get a jack to fold, right? I could possibly get a jack to fold if I bet again on the turn. What hands are going to call me if I bet again on the turn that I'm ahead of? And again, it's going to be those king tens, those straight draws that could call me again if I bet again. So is tens going to call me if I bet? Is a naked jack going to call me if I bet on this turn? Those are questions I want to ask myself before I check it back.
And those feel like they
So
would
what-
be very size dependent. Like your
Yeah.
opponent's calling range might be elastic to sizing with those kind of one pair holdings. So we did choose, as Kim pointed out, we chose sort of a larger sizing on the flop. When they call that, I am more inclined to just kind of give up and to check back the turn like you did here, Keith, because I feel like a smaller bet on the flop, they continue with a bunch of stuff that maybe we can get them to fold on the turn. But the larger flop bet, I think, especially, and you guys broke this down perfectly, we're blocking a lot of the nines. So it's hard to have 10-9. Ace King is a 3-bet pre-flop. So King 10's really the only, straight combo. There's the only straight draw that has a lot of combos out there, and there's no flush draws on the flop, even though the turn does bring in a backdoor. So I agree with you, Keith. I would also check back here. I'd assume that they have a pair. And I guess I'd be interested in seeing how many combos of Jack X or Queen X they might have compared to exactly King 10 or 10-9, even though we're blocking the nines a little bit. But that would be my mindset as well. That would be the way I was thinking about it. Kim, did you have something?
No, I still think lots of people call with backdoors. Like if they have a little bit of it, like even like King something suited that would be a backdoor straight draw and a backdoor flush draw. A lot of people will still call with those sorts of holdings as well.
So Kim, when you've got a hand like pocket nines on a board like this, how do you like to play against that part of your opponent's range? Because we're beating those hands right now. There's one card to come. Do you? I would
always check back this with my.
You would still check back.
Not with all my range, but with this hand.
No. Yeah. So you're not. So like some people might say, let's put a small bet out here to get them to fold those backdoors that are now, mostly air. And I think we're already beating those hands. So you're saying we don't actually need to get them to fold. We can just check back and see how it develops.
And we can see on the river, like, do draws miss? Does a draw come in? Like, what, we can get more information on the river. But I like the check on the turn, personally.
Yeah, me too. Okay, so I'll describe the river, and then Keith, why don't you go through and just talk about the rest of the post before Kim and Rob and I weigh in on what we would do in the river. So the river's got 10,800 in the pot. The river comes the 10 of hearts, and the big blind bets 8,000 into the 10,800 pot. So let's not tell the audience what your action was yet, Keith, but start with the next paragraph and just talk about I guess we're going to spoil it anyway. Okay, so we do we did call. Keith, why don't you just sort of take that about the GTO wizard, and from there, and then we'll talk about the hand.
Okay, yeah, I did a line check on this when I got home, and the GTO wizard agrees with almost everything I did. And like we discussed here, the only thing that got a minority percentage of the mixed strategy was the flop sizing. It is only betting the size I bet about 8% of the time. Now, with most of the range, it was pretty evenly mixed between a very small flop bet, a small flop bet, and the flop bet that I made. But for this particular holding, the flop bet I made only got about 8%. But everything else that I did was correct. It checked back 100% of the time on the turn, and then it checked again on the river. Or the big blind went first, and when he made that big river bet, that's when it got interesting, because I don't know if I tanked for a long time, and I couldn't get any live read on the guy. He was a coffin.
Hmm.
And I decided, you know what, this guy's aggressive. He could be bluffing. I've seen him check raise with third pair and do things like this. He's very aggressive. I'm very easily could be get bluffed here, or he could have eights, sevens, something like that. He could be trying to represent a straight with nothing. This could be a busted straight draw or something.
What about the fact that you have all the ace kings in the world and he doesn't have any?
Yeah,
And you could probably get him to fold 2 pair here if you jammed.
that's an interesting thing, Kim, because GTO Wizard a majority of the time says that I should make the call, but about a quarter of the time it would jam back at him and put him in for his tournament life.
I just ran the hand now. With your specific hand, unless I put something in wrong, it says we virtually never call. We jam most of the time, and we call a little bit of the time, depending on what our nines are. So if we have the 9 of clubs, we fold more often, and if we don't have the 9 of clubs, we jam.
Yeah. So we're looking at 2 different solver results from different.
Well, it has that percentage of call for sure is in general, but with the actual pocket nines, it says you don't call. Now I might have put something in wrong because I'm just doing it on my little iPad here.
Sure. Well, plus then different solvers have different inputs and assumptions.
Well, we were both looking at Wizard, I think. We were both looking at GTO Wizard.
Yeah.
But,
okay. So
we might have had a different input then, yeah.
So, but it's interesting that they would turn pocket nines into a bluff, which I actually really like, because now you can not only are you going to make obviously his you're not only going to make his bluffs fold, but you're going to make his weak made hands fold that are beating you right now.
And even some strong made hands, I think, because when if you think about the action on the hand, if we did have ace king, I could see us playing it similarly, where we've c-bet the flop, we check back the turn, and now the broadways come in, and how I think it's a very strong bluff spot. I think we can definitely get some pairs and maybe even 2 pairs depending on the player to fold here. So that a lot of other runouts wouldn't make it such a good bluff spot, but the fact that it comes jack queen 10 jack queen, that does make me want to shove there wider than I would with other spots. Rob,
I think the fact that we take ace king out of his range immediately means what are the strongest hands that he can have here? Obviously, king 9.
You could have king 9. We're blocking it again pretty hard.
But we're blocking a lot of king 9. So really, would he just call with 10s, jacks, or queens for sets?
Right.
And then if he had any of those, would he just call them on the flop? And probably not. He'd probably be check raising on the flop with any of those types of hands. Maybe not the 10s, but so I think this would be a very interesting bluff spot. The thing is, you have him covered. So if you go over the top of him right here, right now, what is he going to put you on? And the fact that you can take away all his sets and all of his straights, basically, means that you definitely have a huge range advantage here. So this would make an interesting bluff spot. I like what Kim is talking about here.
And if we're turning pocket 9s into a bluff here, then we're bluffing a lot, because we have a lot of lower showdown equity hands that we can use to bluff here. Hands that have a king in them, that block the straight. So I think this is, a pretty high frequency bluff. Keith, you mentioned that you'd spoken to Ryan LaPlante about this. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, just before that, can I just ask you, Keith, like when you were tanking and trying to decide whether to make the call, what are the bluff hands that you're putting him on? And does he have enough of those to make a call for that price?
I was putting him. I was putting him on any kind of a king with a busted straight draw, like a lower suited king or something.
Like
a low pocket pair.
But don't you think he just tries to get his low pocket pair to showdown?
I don't know about with this guy because I'd already seen him check raise with third pair.
He's maybe just attacking you because you showed weakness on the turn then.
Yeah. Yep. That's what I was thinking that he was doing.
And let's like that deserves some emphasis, because when we do check back the turn there, we are inviting some bluffs. And I think it's a common experience for players like us to feel like, oh, well, now I have to call the river because I kind of like induced this line by checking back on the turn. So the only question is, since they're going to be leading all their value hands on the river anyway, did your check back induce enough bluff combos to make that range a profitable range to call against with this hand?
Yep. But then,
please.
But then there's also a metagame dimension to this thing that you have to consider before you ever sit down and play the first hand of a tournament. What tournament am I in? What kind of a game plan should I bring into this thing? Do I need to avoid high variance spots? Calling was a high variance play. Jamming over the top was a high variance play. And or not as actually jamming over the top isn't that high variance, is it? Because it's going to get a lot of folds.
It actually lowers your variance relative to calling. Yeah.
So, but the thing to do here from LPP was to just pitch it and wait for better spots.
Just to fold river, and
this,
just pick a better spot.
Yep, in a very soft tournament like this one.
And that's a good point, because you have to think about the field, right? Like if you're playing, if you're punching above your weight and playing in a field full of crushers, then there's an argument for just upping your variance and taking it to them. But if you feel like you have a skill edge, you really should be turning down some of those break-even spots and waiting for better spots to come up that you will find if it's a good structured tournament.
Yeah, this was the only player on that table that worried me.
Yeah.
So the other ones, I actually had a pretty good seat. The better players, the younger aggressive players were on my right. Yeah. Passive players were on my left. And this guy across the table was the only one that worried me.
So I have some thoughts about our opponent's play, but does anyone else want to talk about Keith's river action or what the options are for him at that point? Okay, so I'll just mention briefly, when I was looking at this, what occurred to me was I really think the villain misplayed the river here. I don't think they had a good value target in mind with their pair of tens on Queen, Jack, 5, 6, 10, because they go for a pretty big sizing here to lead when you have shown weakness. And I'm not sure what hand they're targeting for a call. You have exactly pocket nines, which is like maybe next to 10-9 is like really the only possible holding. You know what I mean? A worse 10, pocket 9. I think you're probably folding, lower pairs. So when they take this big sizing on the river, I feel like they're overplaying their hand. And they maybe got rewarded because you happen to have basically one of the very few combos that you could consider a call with here. But the big sizing feels like if I was in that position, I would take especially on this board. If I was going to value bet, I'd do it to a smaller sizing with the expectation that I'd have to fold to a raise. Rob, you unmuted there.
Yeah, it almost appears based on the sizing, because he's polarizing himself quite a bit here, that he's actually bluffing with his 10.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's almost like he's bluffing with his 10, unless he is so good at reading that he realizes that there's no way Keith could have a queen or a jack because he did not bet the turn.
Mm-hmm.
And
sorry, do you really think like that size is 8,000 into almost 11,000? So to me, that's not really polarizing. That's more like a value bet, in my opinion. And that just goes to show that exactly what Ryan said is full, because this guy doesn't know what he's doing. Value bet.
He even mentioned after the hand, he goes, "Man, when you sat there in the tank, I thought I just lost 8,000 chips."
Yeah, I believe it. I guess the other thing about our opponent's play here is that I agree with you, Keith. It does feel like he's turning it into a bluff. So this is a really interesting hand, because you and your opponent are both faced with this spot on the river where a hand with relatively decent showdown value is being turned into a bluff, like on both sides of the equation. It really goes to show. Yeah. So both checking the turn weakens both of your ranges. And then the river card that dramatically changes the nuts feels like another good time to consider bluffing, because both of those factored in greatly here. Rob, did you have something else? Oh, sorry.
Yeah, I don't think that checking from the big blind on the turn weakens his range at all.
Mm-hmm.
Whatever he had that he called with on the flop, he's probably going to check back again on the turn.
Yeah.
So it didn't his hands didn't change at all. The only one that got weakened was Keith's hand, because he had an opportunity to follow up with another bet and he didn't.
Mm-hmm.
So that brings his range down quite a bit. And it may have given our opponent the in that he needed to bet his 10s.
Mm-hmm.
Because he knows right now that Keith probably doesn't have ace king, because even ace king on that kind of board could follow up with a good bet on the turn.
Yep.
And so now he knows, well, if he had a queen or a jack, he probably would have bet those on the turn, especially being checked to again.
Mm-hmm.
So in reality, what he saw was his 10s were good, because all the hands that Keith should have had to beat him should have probably bet the turn.
But just because your hand is good doesn't mean that you should make a big bet. You know what I mean? It's like, okay, so you're ahead. What does a big bet accomplish? And is it more profitable than a smaller bet? And I just feel like for this player, I feel like if they play against their Keith's entire range, they make more money with a smaller bet than with this bigger bet, because it's just hard, because Keith's range is weaker, because he doesn't have a jack, because he doesn't have a queen. What's he expecting to get called by? I
really don't think he was even thinking that.
Yeah.
I think he was thinking, well, my 10s are going to be good, so I'm going to bet.
Right.
Hopefully he doesn't call me.
Right. Right. Yeah.
So I don't think he was being specific enough. I don't think the opponent was being specific enough about Keith's range. I think he was just thinking, well, he didn't bet on the flop or on the turn, so I'm probably ahead with my 10, so I'm going to bet.
Mm-hmm.
I believe that's probably what he was thinking, and not what a player that would be doing it as a bluff would be thinking, which would be, correct, I'm blocking ace king here because I have a king, so I am going to get this guy off his jack high or his ace jack or whatever he has here. I'm going to bet and get him off this. That's what a good player might be thinking when they make that bet.
Yep.
But I think it's probably more like what Rob says.
I think you're right.
Attacking weakness like of sharks smelling blood in the water, right?
Yeah, whether it's the most profitable line or not. And this is one of the things I really like about this hand, because I think it's a very natural inclination for recreational players to take a check call line a lot, where a bet fold line is typically, is often more profitable. But I think in this case, I think the villain probably in the long run makes a better profit here by check calling and including letting you bluff, even though you didn't on the turn. Because this sizing, I know you paid him off partly because it looked like a bluff, and partly because you had one of your best possible bluff catchers that we've described. And you're blocking some of those other hands. But I feel like this is one of those, the meme where you've got the really smart person and the moron on either side of the bell curve, and then there's like the person in the middle, and both sides of both the idiot and the genius are taking the same action, but for very, very different reasons. And I guess that's what Ryan's saying, right? Like, that's why you turn the spot down, because people are going to make big mistakes like this, and you don't have to really take this chance in order to catch those punts when they happen. It's interesting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like his take.
And he even said in the 1,700, when he came back in further conversation, even in the $1,700 main event, he'd only make that call if the opponent was an elite pro or an absolute psycho.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Either end, right? Either end of the spectrum. I love it. All right.
Which I almost replied, so in order to be an elite pro, you have to be an absolute psycho?
A little bit, I think.
I didn't do that, though.
No, well, honestly, it's a really interesting conversation, a lot of interesting factors. When it comes to your play, Keith, honestly, I would have just bet a little smaller on the flop, and I probably would have folded river in real time.
Yeah.
But just the river call is the only one that sort of pricked my ears up a little bit.
I would have probably made the mistake of betting again on the turn.
Right.
Just because so many people call the flop as non-believers.
Mm-hmm.
Just to see.
Would you bet bigger, Rob?
On the turn? Yeah, I'd probably bet. Well, I would have bet smaller on the flop.
Mm-hmm.
And then I would have bet bigger on the turn. Yeah, like 33, 66 type thing. 33 on the flop, 66 to 75 on the turn.
And you're talking about percentage of the pot there, Rob.
Correct.
Yeah,
Correct.
Yeah.
So
that kind of a line is so profitable.
I know.
I've won a lot of chips. You just doing that with just about anything, really.
Small bet flop. Yeah, small bet flop. Big bet turn. The small flop bet keeps people's ranges wide with a bunch of air in it. And then the turn, big bet takes it away. So you've made a little more money from that flop bet that you would have if they just folded flop. Yeah, that's a bread and butter situation for sure.
Yep. And you're doing that for a couple of reasons. The one is denying equity, because obviously the person has equity. In this particular case, he had King 10.
Mm-hmm.
He had a lot of equity. But could he justify calling 66% of the pot with an open-ended straight draw when you're showing that kind of strength? It could mean that if he hits his straight, you hit a bigger one.
True.
Or you hit your set just hit 2 pair or whatever. It's just, there's just so many variations that, on a King 10 rainbow, you might not be able to call a bigger bet on the turn. And now are we turning our nines into a bluff? Or are we just saying we know that he doesn't have a very strong hand because he would have check raised us if he had us beat?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's that interesting mix of you're not really bluffing so much as denying equity.
Right.
It feels like a bluff because we want them to fold, but we're actually ahead. We're
ahead of a lot of his range.
We're ahead of even the parts of his range that we're trying to get to fold, which is an interesting spot. This is this denying 10. Equity bet, right? Exactly. Which is, we talk a lot about value bets or bluffs, And denying equity is this third kind of bet that essentially acts in our minds. We treat it like a bluff because what we want is folds. Typically, we want to clean up our equity. We mostly want folds.
It's not really a bluff because we're getting hands that we're better than to fold.
Yes.
But we're getting them to fold because they still have a lot of equity.
That's right.
Which can turn on the turn of the river.
So in my mind, it comes down to sizing then. So we just have to give them a price that's wrong. Because if we give them a price that's too good and they call, they're actually not making a mistake. We want them to make a mistake. So we need to offer them a price that is worse than what their pot odds would require for the equity that they have in the hand. So if we give them too good a price, we're kind of value owning ourselves in a way. So this is a very delicate spot between
But that's why we're betting 66 to 75% on the turn,
right?
Because on the turn, they're not getting the right odds to call for an open and straight draw. They only have 8 outs.
And we'd rather they fold even if we are ahead, which is the tricky part, I think. Sorry, Kim, what were you saying?
No, I was going to say, but as played, it went check. And I think that this spot of turning our nines into a bluff is something we should really look at because I would be on Rob's train and be folding the nines. I'm just holding them to that bet. But if you look at it, it's a spot where we can so easily represent ace king. We can just so easy. So this is where I would have taken the time in a live to look at the opponent for all that time you're tanking and see if there's any nervousness at all as you're waiting. Because he said to you afterwards, when you're tanking so much, I thought, for sure that I was going to be beat here. I was throwing away 8,000. So there could have been something there,
If there was, I didn't see it because I was watching.
So I would probably lean more to the fold then if there wasn't anything there, right? Because I just don't think we're beating any value. When you don't see anything from him, we're just not beating any value there with our nines. So I would either turn it into a bluff or fold, and I'm too much of a nit, so I'd probably fold. But I'd like to be able to see those spots to turn these kinds of hands into bluffs.
One other branch of this tree or rabbit hole is that if I had made that small flop bet, I wonder if he would have check raised me with that open-ended draw.
Oh, maybe. Yep, maybe.
And the sizing discouraged him from doing that.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I have no way of ever knowing. So, but that's another thing to think about as you're going through all this. But I have to agree overall. I think the smaller flop sizing would have been the way to go.
But when you do upsize the flop, I like the turn check back because I think it turns it from a sequence of bluffs into a one and done bluff because you just pick the bigger sizing, and so their range is already stronger that goes through it. So I think there's multiple ways to find that equilibrium, but I think that's a good point. Rob or Kim, any other thoughts?
Oh, great hand. Lots to think about.
Very interesting. But think about if you bet smaller and he check raises you get an opportunity to fold.
Right.
And you save a whole ton of money.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah. He declared himself right there. It could easily be a bluff with him, or it could easily be a jack.
Right.
I mean, this guy.
But it was a semi bluff, which is still, still he's got enough equity that any king, any 10,
any ace, any 9,
any 8, any ace, any 9 wins him the pot.
Yeah.
So you fold on the flop, and then you only give away a third of a stack size, or a third of a pot size.
Mm-hmm. Well, really interesting.
There we have it.
Yeah. Thanks for bringing this hand in. I love seeing hands like this posted in the forums here. And if you're listening along at home, I'd encourage you take some notes while you're playing live, or just export the hand history if you're playing online, and pop them up in the RecPoker forums for free. And I'll put the link to this hand in the show notes as well, so you can click on it and see what the conversation's all about over there. But yeah, really interesting spot. It's funny. Some of these hands, it's like open, call, bet, call on the flop, check on the turn. You get to the river. Like, you wouldn't think there was a lot to talk about here, but just goes to show it's a beautiful game we've all fallen in love with, isn't it? Managed to find a few rabbit holes after all. Well, Keith, thank you so much for your post. Kim and Rob, your excellent contributions to us as always. Thanks to the Running Aces Hotel, Racetrack, and Casino. And thanks to you, the listeners, for making this RecPoker podcast what it is. Keep on listening. We'll keep rocking, and we'll see you next week on the RecPoker podcast, everybody.